Even if you ever learned this trick, the level of consistency you'd make getting that first go.
God!
That was incredible. That was straight. That was one of my favorite tricks I've seen in Street League in a very long time. That is next level street skating right there.
7.8.
What? The judges? What's wrong with you guys, man? That was a straight up 9.
It only took Felipe Mota's first best trick attempt in Heat 1 of the prelims at SLS Jacksonville 2022 to remind us all that judging mistakes in skateboarding can make your blood boil.
I'm happy to call that one. Judges messed up on that one if you're watching. That was absolutely
I would
gnarly
have easily put that as a 9. Man, that's wild. Okay.
Unfortunately, Felipe was victim to a peculiarly similar situation at 2021's Super Crown, also in Jacksonville, where his kickflip backtail shove scored only an 8 in the last chance qualifiers. Felipe's currently 15 years young, so it's understandable that getting publicly gypped by the judges would have an adverse effect on this whippersnapper's remaining attempts, which were all bails. Without any explanation from the judges, who we know are Mike Moe, Kelly Hart, Scott Pfaff, Jimmy Gurecki, and Billy Marks, it's honestly anyone's guess as to why a decently well-done big spin hurricane would score so low. If it's true that the judging panel thought Felipe didn't intend to lock into the grind, or on the other hand overlooked the grind and thought it was a big spin front board, then the malicious feedback from comments and Rowley were justified. Having drank the Kool-Aid on trying to have the perspective of the world's most critical judge, an argument, albeit a weak one in hindsight, can be made for justifying Mota's docked score. The landing was slightly wonky, not so much with his feet, although there was the slightest shuffle of the front foot, but there was also a bit of wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube man inspired hand movement to correct his balance.
It's a nice view of the course from there.
Using Yuto as a comparison, his Nollie 270 lip slide variations from the 5th and final heat were pristinely executed from start to finish, including the stomped landing with absolutely zero balance correction. Everything's perfectly centered. Horigomi's Nollie 270 lip slides are difficult for more than one reason, including the fact that they're Nollie, and probably more importantly because they're terrifying, due to the blindside nature of the trick going down a big-ass rail. These lip slide variations, done perfectly and slightly faster than Mota, aren't cracking 9 in the prelims, with the Nollie back 270 understandably scoring higher than the frontside version at 8.8 versus 8.4, respectively. Yuto's textbook execution of a rare, difficult, and scary slide down a rail ended up scoring between 0.6 and 1 full point higher than Felipe's slightly less than perfect big spin hurricane. But the shock factor alone of Mota producing such an unexpected big spin into a difficult grind down the biggest obstacle of the park seemed worthy enough to at least be somewhere in the mid to high 8s, instead of a 7.8 that deflated Felipe's confidence. Hell, right before Felipe, Sora's cab back tail only scored a 7.5, and while it's true he had to shuffle his feet to roll away, you'd think the terror factor of that kind of trick would cancel out any penalty for such minuscule corrections. Rewinding just a bit farther back to the run section, the judges are on their own with explaining Mickey Papa's underscored, flawless 8-trick run awarded only a 7. I guess you could say he doesn't go as fast as his peers, and maybe he didn't quite utilize the course as impressively as the judges would have liked, but 7 is still far too low for a flawless, flip into grind/slide late in line. Come on, you can't dock points from Mickey just because he's got a little TP stuck to the bottom of his shoe. It happens to the best of us. Papa continued to get snubbed by the judges in the best trick section, scoring only an 8.4 on a laser flip lip slide. Maybe the judges aren't the biggest fan of his style, and sure, he did it on the smaller rail, but 8.4 for a laser flip back lip felt a little too low for Mickey's efforts. Since at least one run score is counted towards the field's overall score, Mickey's 8.2 for the nollie heel front board and 8.4 for the laser back lip would be greatly hindered by the atrociously low 7 from the line, giving him a total score of 23.6. By the time prelims were over, Mickey's total score of 23.6 would be good enough for 9th, 1 point and 1 spot shy of making the finals. Sora ended up 8th in prelims. Even with a sugarcane opener and cab backlip ender in his flawless 7-trick line, underscored cab back tail, and thankfully acceptable 9.2 for the backside 180 switch nose grind, he almost got beat out by Ishad Ware in the 5th heat for 8th spot. Ishad flawlessly flowed through the course on his second line with 9 tricks, scoring a 7.9, equivalent to Sora's first run score, and then proceeded to score an 8.4 on the nollie frontside flip lip of attempt number 3 in the best trick section. Ishad must have taken note of the fact that a nollie back heel down the center gap gave both Shane O'Neill and Chris Joslin an 8.5 in previous heats. An 8.5 along with an 8.4 and 7.9 would hypothetically give Ishad, the second to last skater in Heat 5, an overall score of 24.8. 0.2 points above Sora's 24.6. Unfortunately for Ishad, he was leaning just a little bit too far back on the landing and touched the ground, penalizing his score accordingly to a 6.3, allowing Sora to relish the sweet feeling of making the finals. Tori Pudwill was understandably resting on the laurels of his Bigger Bang Theory part, consequently scoring the lowest overall score of the field in prelims with only 2 points. Gustavo Ribeiro landed the most tricks of anyone in prelims in a single line, with 10 total in Heat 2 for a flawless run, and scored only 8.1. Compare that to the highest line score of the prelims, tied between Braden Hoban and Deshaun Jordan's flawless 8-trick runs that each scored a 9. And it tells us that quantity isn't always more important than quality. Thanks to Gustavo's densely packed line, along with his cookie-cutter best tricks via the bigger flip front board and crook nollie flip, he was the only Heat 2 contestant to make the top 8 in prelims. Braden and his monster logo patched Rory Gallagher tee would have the unenviable title of being the skater with the highest scoring run to not make the top 8. If Hoban found a way to average out 2 scores of at least 7.8 in the best trick section, he'd be in the finals, but instead he missed 2 impossible front grinds, then tried to kickflip Melon into a front board. I found it interesting that Braden received the highest line score along with Deshaun, but didn't do anything down the big center rail, nor did he apply anything down it during the best trick section. Hoban's a flip into grind machine, and has footage on footage of him flipping into handrails. Why Braden didn't do a kickflip crook or a kickflip back lip, for example, into the center rail for best trick and score a couple 8s was a head scratcher. But I guess you can chalk that up to either rookie status, or maybe he really isn't consistent enough to land those types of tricks first tee. 2017 SOTY Jamie Foy was a prime example of why you need at least 1 run score in the mid to high 7s to make the finals, as he would end up being the highest scoring best trick producer that didn't place in the top 8. Vincent Malou was one of the 2 skaters in Heat 3 to place top 8, thanks to a flawless 8-trick line that scored 8.6, along with a kickflip gap to board slide that scored an 8.6, and a modest 7.5 for a kickflip front lip, totaling 24.7 points, putting the Frenchman in 7th place. Shane O'Neill was the other Heat 3 skater to snag a top 8 spot, and his run score was the second highest of the day behind Braden and Deshaun's 9s. 7 tricks made up of 1 nollie, 2 switch, and 4 regular seems a little on the tamer side for a Shane O'Neill run, as far as how few switch tricks were implemented, and the last switch tray was, well, a good save, but undoubtedly sketchy. Our boy's been burned in past SLS events, so maybe the judges were feeling remorseful and cranked up the score for Shane's line, because Gustavo did a crook nollie flip amongst 9 other tricks in his run, but only got an 8.1. I guess Shane's nollie back heel lip to fakie opener was enough to set the tone and pad his line with a boosted score. Heat 4 opened with Carlos Ribeiro spending half his run off the board taking a leisurely stroll through the course, with a flawless line of only 6 tricks. No one else with a flawless line had less than 7 tricks except Carlos, and he'll easily be able to cram in at least 2 more tricks if he gives himself a sense of urgency. To be fair, Carlos did add an extra trick to his second flawless line, but the snail pace cancels out the difficulty factor, and ended up scoring lower than his first run at 6.6. I'm watching SLS to see competitive skateboarding, so I don't like seeing lackadaisical effort during skaters' lines, making it hard to argue with the judges giving Carlos the lowest score of the day for a flawless run. Speed it up, Carlos. You've got more of those difficult switch tricks in the bag that you can inflict on the course in 45 seconds. Quit walking around. Felipe Gustavo's flawless 7-trick run was the highest scoring line in that category, with 8.4, outscoring Sora's flawless 7-trick run by half a whole point and Deshawn's by 1.1 points. Along with Nyjah, Felipe would be one of only 2 skaters from Heat 4 to make the top 8. Houston did what he does time and again, producing competitive perfection in the form of a flawless 9-trick run for an 8.6. And kept that average in the best trick section by landing a massive kickflip front board and his relatively new unlocked switch heel into slide maneuver, which tied for 4th as the highest scoring best trick in the prelims, joined by Gustavo's bigger flip front board, Jamie's fakey nose blunt, Deshawn's tray front grind, and Yuto's nollie 270 glip. Heat 5 is where Yuto got busy in the best trick section, from which he desperately needed high scores, because his 7.6 second line would end up being the lowest overall counted run score of the top 8. After his pair of nollie 270 lip variations, Yuto dropped the switch tray lip that we all saw from his X Games victory ender in April, debuting at SLS with the highest score of the day at 9.5. If my research is correct, Leandre Sanders is goofy, so his tray flip lip in the SLS qualifiers was not switch, although it scored a 9.1. If SLS rules were to simply tally up all scores earned by skaters, the actual top 8 would have removed Deshawn, Gustavo, and Shane, and Jamie, Mickey, and Mark Suciu would have been in the finals. But since only one run counts on top of your best 2 single trick scores, Jamie, Mickey, and Mark's efforts didn't align with the strategic SLS nuances. Scores in the finals were predictably higher than prelims as a whole. Sora opened up the first line section with what would end up being tied for 4th as the second highest run score of the day. Only one of the 7 flawless lines in the finals scored below 9, which was Felipe's 7-trick second run, good enough for an 8.9. A good example of how the finals line section is basically prelim scores plus 1 point is Gustavo Ribeiro's copy-paste 10-trick run scoring 8.1 in the prelims, then getting a 9.1 a day later, with no changes other than it took place in the finals. By the time Nyjah finished his second line and scored 9.1, the top 6 scores were all within 0.3 points of each other. Given the tight scoring in the line section, judges must have strategically been generous to any flawless runs, so that the best trick section would force the field to go for broke on scoring as high as possible. Vincent and Shane had a lot of catching up to do in best trick since their runs were less than 9s. So the mid-8s they produced in the first best trick attempt would need to be significantly upgraded in the next 3 turns. Thanks to his strategic approach, Malou realized by the 4th attempt that all he needed to make the super final was a mid-7s score, with the kickflip front lip earning him a top 4 spot. Remember how Gustavo's copy-paste run gave him a full point higher in finals than it did in prelims? Well, that phenomenon didn't exist in the best trick section. Yuto's switch tray lip and Ribeiro's bigger flip front board would end up being scored identically to what they were in the prelims. Same thing can be said about the nollie back heel for Shane, which scored the same 8.5 in finals and prelims. Sora replicated the cab back tail big from his dominant qualifier win in early June, and scored 0.1 points higher than he did at the Primitive Park with a 9.6, which would be the highest score of the day. Shirai was the only skater to land something in attempt number 2, with what Sean Malto called the Christmas grind, aka backside 180 switch crook.
Oh, the Christmas grind!
Backside Christmas grind.
Why is it called the Christmas grind?
Kind of looks like a back tail at first, and then you get the little extra present of the switch front crook.
To get himself a 9. Interestingly, this trick scored higher in prelims for Sora than it did in the finals.
9.2, there we go!
In attempt number 3, Yuto was the first to land something, and that something would be the nollie back 180 switch Smith that he banged us over the head with in his Spitfire part that dropped in December 2021, and that scored another 9.5. At that point, Yuto took the lead from Sora and would enjoy the rare opportunity of watching his competitors try to outscore a 9.4 average. Gustavo stomped a tray front nose grind and got a 9.3, but his 8.7 from the bigger flip front board wouldn't be enough to contend with Sora and Yuto's terrifyingly difficult tricks. Deshaun couldn't replicate the tray front grind from prelims, so him and Nyjah used attempt number 4 to pad their overall SLS standings for the rest of the season. Vincent landed a kickflip front tail in the super final, but without cracking 9, Malou wouldn't budge from 4th. Other than Vincent's trick, no one else landed anything in the super final, meaning Yuto was victorious by the 3rd best trick attempt. Does this all check out? The first question I have is, why did Sora's backside 180 switch crook score lower in finals than it did in prelims? In finals, Sora only got a 9 for the back 1 switch crook, while in prelims he scored a higher 9.2. But Yuto's switch tray lip scored identical 9.5s in prelims and finals. If you go back and scrutinize Yuto's finals line versus Sora's, it's really tough to decide whose is better. Both Sora and Yuto did 7 tricks flawlessly in the second lines, each incorporating a variety of stances and flip tricks, as well as impressive opening and ending tricks. As far as debating Sora's 9.2 versus Yuto's 9.1, given the equal amount of tricks and the flawless nature of each, at this point, I'd argue it comes down to personal preference of whose style you like better. I do think Sora getting docked on the back 180 switch crook in the finals was strange, but even if you give him a 9.2 like he scored in the prelims, Yuto would still win by 0.1 points. If Nyjah lands the kickflip gap front Smith, the plot would obviously thicken further, making the argument of who should win an even more subjectively heated debate. But you can apply the what-if scenario to anybody's skating. The fact remains that Yuto and Sora scored so closely in the end that it does beg the question of who is truly better on this day. The reason I keep bringing up Sora's low 9 for the Christmas grind is because it's a terrifying trick, mainly due to the fact that you're awkwardly spinning away from the rail and you're temporarily blind before locking into the grind. Yuto's switch tray lip is without question a difficult trick, but there's no blindside factor, and I'd argue that there's not as much awkward turning as a back 1 switch crook. That being said, you need to have switch trays down well enough to not only pop them onto a rail, but also pivot enough to land into a lip slide. How long will it be before Yuto's doing switch trays into a nose blunt? In the end, since Yuto was able to respond to Sora's Christmas grind on attempt 3, and Shirai couldn't manage to roll away from his famous cab sugarcane in 4 straight attempts, Horigome winning is definitely deserved. Hopefully, Sora's hungry enough to come back and make it even harder for Yuto to win down the road.